Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had been called many things during her 8 years in the Army. Most of them weren't complimentary. At 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing barely 120 pounds, she looked more like a college student than one of the most lethal snipers in the United States military. Her fellow soldiers often made the mistake of underestimating her, at least until they saw her work. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training range at Fort Bragg as Maria adjusted her scope for the third time. Around her, a dozen male snipers from various units were preparing for what had become known as the Impossible Shot Challenge. The target sat nearly 2 miles away, a distance that pushed even the most advanced rifle systems to their absolute limits. "You sure you want to try this?" "Santos," called out Sergeant First Class Jake Morrison, a burly man with arms like tree trunks. He was known throughout the base for his shooting skills and his mouth. "This isn't like shooting pop cans behind your daddy's barn." Maria didn't look up from her rifle. She had learned long ago that the best response to men like Morrison was results, not words. Her rifle, a custom-built .338 Lapua Magnum, had been modified specifically for extreme long-range shooting. Every component had been carefully selected and tested. The scope alone cost more than most soldiers made in 3 months. The challenge had started 6 months earlier when a group of snipers began competing to see who could hit targets at increasingly impossible distances. What began as friendly competition had evolved into something more serious. Word had spread throughout the special operations community about these shooting contests. Today, observers from Delta Force, Navy SEALs, and even CIA contractors had come to watch. Colonel Richards, the range officer, explained the rules one final time. "The target is a 6-inch steel plate at 3,200 meters. That's just under 2 miles for those keeping track in freedom units. Wind is gusting from the southwest at 12 to 15 miles per hour. Temperature is 78 degrees. Humidity is 62%. You have 1 shot. Miss, and you're done." Maria calculated the variables in her head. The distance alone meant her bullet would be in the air for nearly 4 seconds. In that time, wind could push it several feet off course. The target would appear smaller than a pinhead through even the most powerful scope. She would need to account for the Earth's rotation, air pressure, and dozens of other factors that most people never considered. The first shooter, a Marine Corps sniper named Thompson, took his position. His rifle was a .50 caliber Barrett, a weapon designed for destroying vehicles rather than precision shooting. The massive gun could punch through engine blocks, but accuracy at extreme range was questionable. Thompson spent 5 minutes adjusting his position before taking the shot. The boom echoed across the range like thunder. Through the spotting scope, observers watched the impact point. The bullet struck dirt 20 feet to the left of the target. Thompson shook his head and stood up, disappointed but not surprised. The distance was simply beyond what most rifles and shooters could manage consistently. 3 more shooters tried and failed. Their bullets disappeared into the landscape without even coming close to the steel plate. Each miss only reinforced what everyone already believed. Hitting a 6-inch target at 2 miles was more about luck than skill. Morrison stepped up next, carrying his custom rifle with obvious pride. He had been bragging for weeks about modifications he had made to the gun and the special ammunition he had developed. The rifle looked like something from a science fiction movie, covered in electronic devices and computational aids. "Watch and learn, people," Morrison announced as he settled into position. He spent 10 minutes making adjustments, consulting a tablet computer that calculated ballistics in real time. When he finally fired, the shot seemed perfect. Everyone expected to hear the distinctive ping of bullets striking steel. Instead, they heard nothing except Morrison cursing. His bullet had passed just inches over the target, close enough to count as a near miss, but still a failure. He stood up, clearly frustrated, and glared in Maria's direction. "Your turn, little girl. Show us how it's done." Maria had been observing every shot carefully. She noticed how each bullet behaved differently in the wind. The misses weren't random. They followed predictable patterns based on conditions that changed every few minutes. While the other shooters focused on their equipment and calculations, Maria had been reading the environment. She carried her rifle to the firing line without ceremony. The weapon looked almost plain compared to Morrison's high-tech setup. Where his rifle bristled with electronic devices, hers relied on carefully calibrated mechanical systems. Her scope was powerful but simple. Her ammunition was match-grade but not exotic. The difference was in the preparation. Maria had been studying this particular range for months. She knew how wind patterns changed throughout the day. She understood how heat rising from different parts of the landscape affected bullet flight. Most importantly, she had developed an intuitive understanding of her rifle that went beyond any computer calculation. As Maria settled into position, the range fell silent. Even the observers from special operations units leaned forward with interest. Stories about her shooting ability had circulated for years, but few people had seen her attempt anything this challenging. Through her scope, the target was barely visible as a tiny dark spot against the hillside. At this distance, even the slightest movement would send her bullet completely off target. Maria controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate until each beat was separated by long, calm moments. She made a small adjustment to her scope, then another. The wind had shifted slightly since Morrison's shot. Most shooters would have tried to compensate by aiming into the wind, but Maria had noticed something else. The wind wasn't consistent across the entire bullet path. There were areas where it swirled differently, pockets of calm air, and spots where cross-currents could actually help guide a bullet to its target. The other snipers couldn't see what she was doing. Her adjustments appeared random, almost careless. Morrison whispered to another shooter that she was obviously in over her head. Female snipers were rare enough in the Army. Female snipers attempting shots that challenged the laws of physics were unheard of. Maria's finger found the trigger. She had fired this rifle thousands of times and knew exactly how much pressure was needed. Too little, and the shot would be thrown off by her pulse. Too much and muscle tension would pull the rifle out of alignment. The trigger break needed to be perfect. But instead of firing immediately, Maria waited. Something wasn't quite right. The wind had shifted again, just slightly, but enough to matter at this range. She adjusted her aim one more time, moving the crosshairs to a point that seemed impossibly far from the actual target. "Take the damn shot already," Morrison muttered under his breath. Maria ignored him. She had learned patience during her first deployment in Afghanistan, where rushing a shot could mean the difference between stopping an insurgent and hitting a civilian. That lesson had saved lives then and would determine success or failure now. The wind steadied for just a moment. Maria felt, rather than saw, the perfect conditions align. Her finger moved smoothly against the trigger until the rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the range. The bullet left the barrel at nearly 3,000 feet per second, but even at that speed, it would take almost 4 seconds to reach the target. During those 4 seconds, everyone on the range held their breath. The bullet was invisible in flight, a tiny piece of copper and lead flying through space on a trajectory that existed only in Maria's mind. 3 seconds passed, then 4, then 5. The silence stretched on. No one had heard the distinctive sound of bullets striking steel that they were all listening for. Morrison began to smile, preparing another cutting comment about female soldiers trying to do men's work. Then Colonel Richards's voice came over the radio from the spotting position. "Impact on target, direct hit." The range erupted in disbelief. Several snipers grabbed binoculars and scopes to verify the impossible. Through high-powered optics, they could clearly see that the 6-inch steel plate had been struck dead center, a perfect hit at a distance that should have been impossible. Morrison's smile disappeared. "That's impossible. No way she made that shot." But the evidence was undeniable. The steel target bore a fresh impact mark exactly in the center. Maria's bullet had traveled nearly 2 miles through changing wind conditions and still found its mark with surgical precision. "How?" asked Thompson, the Marine who had shot first. "I mean, seriously, how did you do that?" Maria began cleaning her rifle, a process that she approached with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. "Practice," she said simply. But the other snipers knew it was more than that. What they had witnessed defied their understanding of marksmanship. The shot required not just skill, but an almost supernatural ability to read conditions and predict outcomes. Colonel Richards approached the group with a serious expression. He had been watching through high-powered spotting equipment and had seen something that the others missed. "Santos, I need to speak with you privately." They walked away from the group while the other snipers continued to debate what they had witnessed. Some were already claiming that Maria must have gotten lucky. Others insisted that no one, not even the best sniper in the world, could make that shot consistently. "That shot you just made," Colonel Richards said quietly, "it's going to attract attention. The kind of attention that changes careers and assignments." Maria continued cleaning her rifle. "I just shot where I aimed, sir." "Don't give me that modest act, Santos. I've been watching snipers for 20 years. What you did out there isn't normal. Hell, it isn't even possible according to most ballistics experts." The colonel paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've got a call to make. There are people who have been looking for someone with your particular skills. People who work on problems that don't officially exist." Maria finally looked up from her rifle. "What kind of problems?" "The kind where failure isn't an option and success requires doing things that other people say can't be done." Behind them, the argument among the snipers was growing heated. Morrison was insisting that Maria must have cheated somehow, though he couldn't explain how. Thompson was defending the legitimacy of the shot, having seen the impact with his own eyes. "The shot was clean," Thompson argued. "We all saw it. The target was hit dead center." "Bull!" Morrison shot back. "Nobody makes a shot like that. Not at that range, not in those conditions. There's got to be an explanation." But there was no explanation that satisfied the skeptics. Maria had accomplished something that challenged their fundamental understanding of what was possible with a rifle and scope. The shot would become legendary among snipers, debated and discussed for years to come. As Maria packed her equipment, she noticed several of the special operations observers taking photos of her rifle and making notes. Word of the impossible shot would spread quickly through the special operations community. By evening, stories would be circulating through military bases around the world about a female Army sniper who had made a shot that defied physics. What none of them knew was that this was just the beginning. The shot that seemed impossible to them was routine compared to what Maria would soon be asked to do. In a world where enemies used increasingly sophisticated methods to hide and protect themselves, conventional sniper tactics were becoming obsolete. The military needed snipers who could adapt to new challenges, who could find ways to succeed when traditional methods failed. They needed soldiers who could think beyond the limitations that others accepted as absolute. Colonel Richards finished his phone call and returned to where Maria was securing her rifle case. "Pack light, Santos. You're being transferred to a unit that doesn't appear on any official charts. Your new commanding officer will brief you tomorrow morning at 0600. "What about my current assignment, sir?" "Consider it completed. As of right now, you're working on problems that require solutions other people haven't thought of yet." The other snipers were still arguing as Maria walked toward the parking area. Morrison was trying to convince anyone who would listen that the shot was somehow faked or that environmental conditions had been artificially manipulated. His inability to accept what he had witnessed said more about his limitations than Maria's abilities. That evening, Maria sat in her base quarters, cleaning and maintaining her rifle one more time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, and new opportunities to do the impossible. The shot at the range had been a demonstration, a proof of concept that would open doors to assignments she had never imagined. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Impressive shooting today. Looking forward to working with you. Report to Building 47 at 0600. Come prepared for extended deployment." Maria smiled as she read the message. Extended deployment meant real missions, real targets, and real opportunities to use her skills where they mattered most. The impossible shot at the range had been just practice. Tomorrow, she would begin learning what impossible really meant. Building 47 looked like every other administrative building on the base, but Maria knew better than to judge by appearances. The text message had been clear about timing, and she arrived at exactly 6 in the morning, carrying only her rifle case and a small pack with essential gear. The man waiting for her inside wore civilian clothes, but moved with the precise bearing of someone accustomed to command. He was older, maybe 50, with gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his surroundings. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades making life-and-death decisions. "Staff Sergeant Santos, I'm Director Walsh. What you did yesterday has created quite a stir in certain circles." He gestured for her to follow him down a corridor lined with doors that bore no identifying marks. "Tell me, do you understand what made that shot special?" Maria considered the question as they walked. "The distance wasn't impossible, sir. Difficult, but not impossible. The challenge was reading all the variables correctly and timing the shot perfectly." Walsh stopped at an unmarked door and pressed his palm against a hidden scanner. "Most snipers would have said the variables were too numerous to calculate. You treated them like a puzzle to be solved rather than obstacles to overcome." The door opened into a room that looked nothing like military standard. Banks of computer monitors lined the walls, displaying satellite imagery, weather data, and what appeared to be real-time surveillance feeds from locations around the world. 3 people in civilian clothes worked at different stations, their attention focused on information that clearly wasn't meant for general consumption. "Welcome to the Enhanced Marksmanship Program," Walsh said, closing the door behind them. "We identify and develop unconventional solutions to problems that conventional military tactics can't address." He led Maria to a large screen displaying a satellite image of what appeared to be a Middle Eastern city. Red markers indicated multiple points of interest, while green lines showed patrol routes and blue zones marked civilian populations. 6 months ago, a high-value target established himself in this location, Walsh explained, pointing to a compound in the center of the image. "Ahmad Qasem, bomb maker responsible for attacks that have killed over 300 civilians. Intelligence indicates he's planning something bigger, but he's made himself nearly impossible to reach through conventional means." The image zoomed in to show a heavily fortified compound surrounded by multiple defensive layers, guard towers, concrete barriers, and what appeared to be sophisticated detection equipment created a protective bubble around the central buildings. "Every approach has been analyzed," Walsh continued. "Airstrikes would cause massive civilian casualties. Ground assault would face overwhelming defensive positions. Special operations teams can't get close enough for effective engagement. Traditional sniper positions are either too distant for reliable shots or too exposed for operator safety." Maria studied the layout carefully. The compound sat in the middle of a dense urban area with buildings packed tightly on all sides. Civilians moved constantly through nearby streets, making any direct assault impossible without significant collateral damage. "What about surrounding buildings?" she asked, noting several structures that appeared to offer elevated positions. "All under surveillance. Qasem's security team monitors every building within a mile radius. They've identified and prepared countermeasures for every conventional sniper position." Walsh pulled up additional images showing the extent of the security arrangements. "This man has studied how special operations work, and he's created defenses specifically designed to neutralize traditional tactics." Maria continued examining the imagery, looking for details that others might have missed. The compound's defenses were impressive, but not perfect. Every security system had vulnerabilities, and she was beginning to see patterns that suggested possibilities. "What's the timeline?" she asked. "Intelligence indicates Qasem will be meeting with his cell leaders in 72 hours. It's our only confirmed opportunity to locate and engage him before he disappears again." Walsh gestured to a woman working at one of the computer terminals. "This is Sarah Chen, our intelligence analyst. She's been tracking Qasem's movements and security procedures for 6 months. Chen turned from her workstation, revealing a face that looked too young for the level of responsibility she clearly carried. "Staff Sergeant, I've been following your career since that shot in Afghanistan that saved the convoy. What you're dealing with here is different from anything you've encountered before." She brought up a new series of images showing the interior layout of the compound. "Qasem never appears in the same location twice. He moves between safe rooms using underground tunnels. When he does surface, he's surrounded by bodyguards and protected by advanced countermeasures." "What kind of countermeasures?" Maria asked. "Electronic jammers that disrupt communications and guidance systems, smoke generators that can obscure the entire compound in seconds, and snipers of their own positioned to engage any external threats." Maria absorbed this information while continuing to study the tactical situation. The challenge wasn't just making an impossible shot. It was making an impossible shot while enemy snipers tried to kill her, and electronic systems worked to disrupt her equipment. Walsh opened a map case and spread out detailed blueprints of the surrounding area. "Our advance team has identified 3 possible positions that might offer shots into the compound. All of them require eliminating multiple technical and human obstacles. The first position was a construction crane nearly a mile from the target. It offered elevation and a clear line of sight, but getting to the crane unseen would be extremely difficult, and the position would be exposed to return fire from multiple directions. The second option was a rooftop 6 blocks away, closer than the crane, but with a much more complex shot path that would require the bullet to pass through narrow gaps between buildings. Wind conditions in the urban canyon made accuracy nearly impossible to predict. The third position was a water tower outside the city limits, maximum distance at nearly 3 miles, but potentially the safest approach route. The distance alone would push any rifle system beyond its effective range, especially with the additional complications of urban heat distortion and unpredictable wind patterns. "Previous teams have attempted all 3 positions," Walsh said quietly. "None came close to success. 2 teams were compromised before they could even attempt shots. The third team managed to fire, but missed the target completely." Maria traced potential bullet paths on the blueprints, calculating angles and distances in her head. Each position presented unique challenges that would require different equipment and tactics. But something about the layout bothered her, a feeling that they were missing an obvious solution. "Has anyone considered non-traditional approaches?" she asked. Chen looked up from her computer. "What do you mean?" "Everyone's thinking about this like a conventional sniper engagement. Long-range shot from an elevated position using standard tactics. But Qasem has prepared defenses against standard tactics." Maria pointed to an area of the map that showed a park adjacent to the compound. "What if the shot doesn't come from where he expects?" Walsh frowned. "That park is under constant observation. Any sniper attempting to set up there would be detected immediately. Not if they don't set up a traditional sniper position." Maria's finger traced a line from the park to the compound that seemed to pass through solid buildings. "The shot doesn't have to be direct. What if we use the environment to our advantage instead of fighting against it?" She was thinking about ricochet shots, bullets that could be deliberately bounced off hard surfaces to reach targets that were otherwise protected. It was a technique that required extraordinary precision and deep understanding of ballistics, but it could make possible shots that seemed impossible. Chen pulled up structural engineering data for the buildings between the park and the compound. "You're talking about a ricochet shot through an urban environment. The variables would be enormous." But not incalculable, Maria replied. Every surface has predictable properties. Concrete, steel, glass, they all behave consistently when struck by high-velocity projectiles. The challenge is mapping all the surfaces and calculating the exact angles needed. Walsh looked skeptical. Even if such a shot were theoretically possible, the margin for error would be microscopic. 1 degree off, and the bullet could end up anywhere. That's why it would work, Maria said. Qasem's security team has never prepared defenses against ricochet shots because everyone assumes they're too difficult to execute reliably. Over the next 6 hours, Maria worked with Chen to analyze every building, every surface, and every potential bounce point between the park and the compound. They used advanced ballistic software to model bullet behavior, but the calculations quickly became too complex for any computer to solve definitively. The software can give us approximations, Chen explained, but there are too many variables for precise prediction. Surface irregularities, minor variations in bullet manufacturing, atmospheric conditions, any one of them could throw off the entire sequence. Maria studied the data, but knew that computers could only take them so far. This kind of shot would require intuition built through years of experience, an ability to read environmental conditions that went beyond mathematical calculations. "I need to see the location in person," she said finally. Walsh checked his watch. "We can arrange reconnaissance, but you'll have to move fast. Intelligence suggests Qasem's meeting is happening ahead of schedule." Within 2 hours, Maria found herself on a transport helicopter flying toward an insertion point 20 miles from the target city. Her equipment had been modified for the mission: a custom rifle optimized for ricochet shots, special ammunition designed to maintain stability after multiple impacts, and communication gear that could function despite electronic jamming. The insertion went smoothly. Local assets had prepared a safe route into the city that avoided known surveillance points. By evening, Maria was positioned in a building overlooking the park she had identified from the satellite imagery. Through her scope, she could see the compound clearly. Security patrols moved in predictable patterns, while electronic sensors swept the surrounding area for threats. Everything looked exactly as Chen had described, except for one crucial detail. The building she needed to bounce her bullet off had a glass surface that hadn't shown up clearly in the satellite photos. Glass behaved differently than concrete or steel when struck by high-velocity projectiles. It could shatter unpredictably, sending bullet fragments in random directions. Maria radioed her observations back to the command post. "The ricochet surface is glass, not concrete. That changes the ballistics significantly." Chen's voice crackled through the encrypted communication system. "Glass impacts are much less predictable, even if you can shatter it cleanly. Controlling the bullet path afterward becomes extremely difficult." But Maria had already identified an alternative. The glass wasn't the only potential ricochet surface. A steel utility pole 20 feet to the left offered better ballistic properties, though it would require an even more complex shot path. "I'm adjusting to use the utility pole as the bounce point," she radioed. "This will work." What she didn't tell the command team was that the adjusted shot path would require a level of precision that exceeded anything she had ever attempted. The bullet would need to travel over half a mile, strike the steel pole at exactly the right angle, maintain enough velocity and stability to continue another quarter mile, and still retain sufficient accuracy to hit a target the size of a human head. The laws of physics suggested it was impossible. Ballistics experts would have calculated the probability as essentially zero. But Maria had stopped thinking about probability and started thinking about certainty. She had been studying the target area for 3 hours when Qasem finally appeared. He emerged from an underground entrance exactly as intelligence had predicted, surrounded by 4 bodyguards and moving quickly toward one of the compound's safe rooms. The window of opportunity would last less than 10 seconds. Maria had already calculated wind speed, humidity, and temperature. She knew exactly where she needed to place her shot to achieve the proper ricochet angle. Her rifle was aligned, and her breathing was controlled. The first sniper who spotted her position was watching through a scope from one of the compound's guard towers. He saw Maria's muzzle flash and immediately radioed an alert, but by then it was too late. Maria's bullet traveled 600 meters in just over half a second. It struck the steel utility pole at precisely the angle she had calculated, fragmenting slightly but maintaining enough coherent mass to continue on its intended trajectory. The ricochet sent the projectile through a gap between two buildings, past a water tank that could have deflected it off course and into the compound's courtyard. Qasem was halfway between the underground entrance and the safe room when the bullet found its target. The impact was so precise that his bodyguards initially didn't understand what had happened. There had been no muzzle flash from any expected direction, no sound of a nearby gunshot. The enemy snipers frantically scanned every building and elevated position within 2 miles, looking for the shooter who had somehow managed to kill their principal without being detected. They found nothing because they were looking in the wrong places and using the wrong assumptions about what was possible. Maria was already moving from her position when confirmation of the target's elimination came through her radio. The shot had been perfect, but staying in place would have meant capture or death. Within minutes, hostile forces would be searching every building in the area. As she moved through predetermined escape routes, Maria could hear the confusion in enemy radio communications that her team was monitoring. The hostile forces couldn't understand how Qasem had been killed. They had accounted for every possible sniper position and protected against every conventional attack method. What they hadn't considered was a sniper who could turn the urban environment itself into part of her weapon system. The ricochet shot had been impossible by every standard tactical doctrine, which was exactly why it had succeeded. The extraction proceeded without incident. By dawn, Maria was back at the command post, filing her after-action report and answering detailed questions about the engagement. Walsh and his team were particularly interested in the technical aspects of the ricochet shot. The ballistics analysis shows the bullet lost approximately 30% of its velocity on impact with the utility pole, Chen reported. It should have been insufficient to maintain accuracy over the remaining distance. Maria cleaned her rifle while she listened to the technical discussion. She understood that what she had accomplished would be studied and analyzed, but she also knew that no amount of analysis would make such shots routine or predictable. The shot worked because all the variables aligned correctly, she said finally. Wind, temperature, humidity, the exact composition of the steel pole, even the manufacturer's tolerance on the ammunition. Change any one factor by a small amount, and the shot becomes impossible. Walsh nodded slowly. Which means this technique can't be taught or replicated reliably. Not with current technology, Maria agreed. Maybe someday we'll have computers fast enough and sensors precise enough to make these calculations routine. But right now, it requires human judgment and intuition that can't be programmed. That assessment was both a strength and a limitation. Maria could accomplish things that seemed impossible, but only under specific conditions that might not be repeatable. She was a unique asset, but not one that could be easily replaced or duplicated. The mission had been successful, but it had also revealed the extraordinary nature of what Maria could do. Word of the ricochet shot would spread through classified channels, creating both opportunities and dangers. There were missions that only she could accomplish, but there were also people who would see her abilities as a threat to be eliminated. As Maria prepared for her next assignment, she wondered how long she could continue doing the impossible before someone found a way to make her stop. The debriefing room at Langley was different from any military facility Maria had seen. No flags, no insignia, no indication of what organization operated from this building. The men and women who questioned her wore expensive suits instead of uniforms, but they asked questions with the precision of people who understood exactly how close operations worked. The ricochet shot has created what we might call a diplomatic situation, said Director Walsh, though his tone suggested this wasn't entirely bad news. 3 different intelligence agencies are claiming credit for the elimination. Nobody wants to admit they didn't know it was possible. Maria sipped coffee that was considerably better than anything available on military bases. 5 days had passed since the operation, and she was still processing what had happened. The impossible shot had worked perfectly, but the aftermath was becoming more complex than the mission itself. The technical analysis is complete, reported Dr. Elizabeth Harper, a woman whose credentials included advanced degrees in physics and ballistics engineering. Computer simulations suggest the probability of success for your ricochet shot was approximately 1 in 50,000. That's assuming perfect conditions and no margin for error. Yet it worked, Walsh observed. It worked because Staff Sergeant Santos made calculations and adjustments that our computers couldn't model, Dr. Harper continued. She read environmental conditions in real time and adapted her shot parameters based on observations that would be impossible to quantify mathematically. The implications were significant. Maria had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded what current technology could predict or replicate. That made her valuable, but it also made her a potential target for people who wanted to understand or eliminate her abilities. There have been inquiries, Walsh said carefully. Foreign intelligence services are asking questions about how Qasim was eliminated. Some of them have concluded that we've developed new weapons technology. Others suspect we have snipers with capabilities beyond what they thought possible. Maria understood the subtext. Her success had attracted the wrong kind of attention from the wrong kind of people. Intelligence agencies around the world were now trying to determine if her abilities represented a new American advantage that they needed to counter. "What's the assessment?" she asked. Dr. Harper consulted a tablet computer before answering. "Based on analysis of your previous missions and training records, we believe your abilities result from a unique combination of factors: exceptional visual processing, intuitive understanding of ballistics, and pattern recognition that operates at an almost subconscious level. In other words," Walsh added, "you do things that can't be taught and can't be easily explained. That makes you extremely valuable and extremely vulnerable." The vulnerability aspect was something Maria had been considering since the mission. If foreign intelligence agencies concluded that she represented a strategic advantage, they would work to eliminate or capture her. Traditional security measures might not be sufficient against determined adversaries. "We've prepared several options for your next assignment," Walsh said, opening a classified folder. "Each one involves challenges that conventional snipers couldn't address." The first option was a counter-sniper mission in Eastern Europe. Enemy forces had positioned a highly skilled marksman in a location that provided excellent cover while threatening Allied operations. Multiple attempts to neutralize the threat had failed, and conventional approaches were no longer viable. "The target is using an underground position with multiple exit routes," Dr. Harper explained. "He appears for seconds at a time through small openings, making traditional sniper engagement nearly impossible. The shot would require predicting his appearance and placing a bullet through an opening smaller than a dinner plate." The second option involved a different kind of challenge entirely. A terrorist organization had taken hostages in a building designed to defeat rescue operations. The hostages were being held in a room surrounded by explosive devices that would detonate if conventional entry methods were used. "The only way to neutralize the threat without killing the hostages is through a precision shot that disables the detonation system," Walsh continued. "The target is a component smaller than a coin, located inside a device designed to resist external interference." Both missions were technically impossible by conventional standards. The margins for error were so small that success would require the same kind of intuitive understanding that had made the ricochet shot possible. But Maria was more interested in a third folder that Walsh hadn't opened. "What about that one?" Walsh hesitated before answering. "That's a different category of mission, one that we're not sure anyone is ready for." He opened the folder to reveal satellite imagery of what appeared to be a research facility in a remote location. The buildings were surrounded by natural barriers and sophisticated defense systems that made approach extremely difficult. Intelligence indicates this facility is developing weapons specifically designed to counter advanced sniper capabilities, Dr. Harper explained. They're studying captured equipment from failed missions and analyzing techniques used by elite marksmen. The implications were clear. Someone was systematically working to neutralize the advantages that snipers like Maria provided. The research facility represented a direct threat to her continued effectiveness and possibly her survival. The target isn't a person, Walsh continued. It's the research data itself, computer servers containing analysis of American sniper techniques and countermeasures being developed to defeat them. The mission would require infiltrating a heavily defended facility, locating specific computer systems, and destroying data without alerting security forces. It was more like a special operations raid than a sniper mission, except that success would depend entirely on Maria's unique shooting abilities. "Why me?" Maria asked. "This sounds like a job for a cyber warfare specialist or a commando unit." "Because the servers are in a room that can't be reached through conventional means," Dr. Harper said, pulling up architectural diagrams of the facility. "The only access is through a ventilation system that terminates in a grate too small for human entry." Maria studied the diagrams carefully. The ventilation grate opened into the server room from an elevated position. A precise shot through the grating could potentially disable the computer systems, but the angle and distance would make accuracy extremely challenging. "You're talking about shooting through a 6-inch opening at a target I can't directly observe," Maria said. "The technical requirements are similar to your previous mission," Walsh replied. "Impossible by conventional standards, but potentially achievable given your demonstrated capabilities." What he didn't say was that this mission would be personal. The research being conducted at the facility was specifically aimed at defeating snipers like Maria. Every technique she had developed, every shot she had made, was being studied and analyzed to create countermeasures. Maria closed the folders and leaned back in her chair. 3 months earlier, she had been a conventional Army sniper working routine assignments. Now she was being asked to undertake missions that challenged the limits of what human beings could accomplish with rifles and scopes. "There's something else you need to know," Walsh said quietly. "We've received intelligence that suggests other countries are attempting to develop snipers with capabilities similar to yours." Dr. Harper nodded grimly. "Foreign military programs are analyzing footage of your shots and trying to identify training methods that could replicate your results. They don't understand that your abilities can't be duplicated through conventional training." The idea of enemy snipers with similar capabilities was troubling. Maria's success depended partly on the element of surprise, on accomplishing things that adversaries didn't think were possible. If multiple snipers could make impossible shots, the tactical advantages would shift dramatically. "How long before they succeed?" Maria asked. "Unknown," Walsh admitted. "But we can't assume we'll maintain this advantage indefinitely, which is why missions like these are time-sensitive." Maria understood the urgency. Her window of opportunity was limited by how long she could continue making impossible shots before enemies developed effective countermeasures. Every mission needed to count, because there might not be many more. "I'll take the facility mission," she said finally. Dr. Harper looked surprised. "It's the most technically challenging of the 3 options. The shot requirements are at the absolute edge of what our analysis suggests might be possible. That's why it needs to be done now, before they complete their research." Walsh nodded approvingly. "Mission preparation begins tomorrow. You'll have access to detailed facility intelligence and specialized equipment designed specifically for this operation." But the specialized equipment wasn't what would make the difference. Maria knew that success would depend on the same intuitive understanding that had guided her previous impossible shots: the ability to read environmental conditions, predict bullet behavior, and make adjustments that couldn't be calculated by any computer. Over the next week, Maria studied every aspect of the target facility. She memorized guard schedules, security protocols, and structural details. She practiced shots through increasingly small openings until she could place bullets precisely where she intended, despite extremely limited visibility. The practice sessions revealed just how challenging the actual mission would be. The ventilation grate was positioned at an angle that would require her to ricochet a bullet off internal surfaces to reach the servers. Even minor variations in air pressure inside the building could affect bullet trajectory enough to cause complete mission failure. The margin for error is essentially zero, Dr. Harper reported after analyzing Maria's practice sessions. Computer models suggest that even perfect execution might not guarantee success. Maria continued practicing anyway. She had learned to trust her instincts more than computer models, and her instincts suggested that the shot was possible under the right conditions. The challenge would be creating those conditions during the actual mission. The insertion was scheduled for a night when weather conditions would provide maximum concealment. Cloud cover would limit satellite observation, while humidity levels would affect bullet flight in predictable ways. Every environmental factor had been analyzed and incorporated into mission planning. But as Maria prepared her equipment for deployment, she received an unexpected message from Colonel Richards, her former commander at Fort Bragg. The message was brief but concerning. "Morrison has been asking questions about your techniques. Thought you should know." The implication was clear. Morrison, the sniper who had questioned her impossible shot at the training range, was still trying to understand how she had accomplished what seemed impossible. His inquiries could potentially compromise operational security if he shared information with the wrong people. Maria forwarded the message to Walsh, who responded within hours with additional security measures. Her identity would be further protected, and her previous assignments would be reclassified to prevent unauthorized access. But the damage might already be done if Morrison had shared information before the security upgrades. "This changes the timeline," Walsh told her during a final briefing. "Intelligence suggests that hostile forces may be closer to understanding your capabilities than we previously estimated. The facility mission needs to happen immediately." Dr. Harper had prepared a final analysis of the shot requirements. "Based on all available data, success depends on placing a bullet through a 6-inch opening, ricocheting off a specific surface inside the ventilation system, and striking a target roughly the size of a smartphone from a distance of approximately 400 meters. The technical requirements were staggering. Any one of those factors would be challenging for a conventional sniper. Combining all of them into a single shot pushed beyond the boundaries of what ballistics experts considered theoretically possible. But Maria had stopped thinking about theoretical possibilities. The shot was either achievable or it wasn't, and the only way to determine which was to attempt it under real conditions. Computer simulations and practice sessions could only provide approximations of what would happen during the actual mission. The night of the operation, Maria found herself positioned on a hillside overlooking the research facility. Her rifle had been modified with advanced optics that could provide limited visibility through the ventilation grate. She could barely make out the internal surfaces that would guide her bullet to its target. Weather conditions were optimal. Wind speed was minimal, humidity was within acceptable parameters, and temperature was stable. Every environmental factor that could be controlled had been optimized for maximum accuracy. Through her scope, Maria could see security patrols moving according to their predicted schedules. The facility's defenses were designed to prevent human infiltration, not to defend against precision fire from extreme range. The designers had never considered that someone might attempt to destroy internal systems through the ventilation system. Maria controlled her breathing and began the mental calculations that would guide her shot. The bullet would need to enter the grate at exactly the right angle, maintain sufficient velocity after impact with internal surfaces, and still possess enough accuracy to disable the target computers. She had been studying the target for 20 minutes when the optimal moment arrived. Guard positions aligned to provide maximum concealment, atmospheric conditions stabilized, and her own physical state reached peak readiness. The shot itself felt different from any she had made before. The bullet left her rifle and traveled through night air toward a target she couldn't directly observe. 400 meters later, it struck the ventilation grate and ricocheted off internal surfaces, according to calculations that existed only in Maria's mind. The result was immediate and unmistakable. Explosions of sparks visible through building windows indicated that electrical systems had been catastrophically damaged. Emergency lighting activated throughout the facility as primary power systems failed. Maria was already moving from her position when radio confirmation arrived. Target neutralized. All primary servers destroyed. Mission successful. The impossible shot had worked again, but Maria knew it would be the last time she could rely on enemies underestimating what was possible. Her abilities were becoming too well known, too thoroughly analyzed. Future missions would require new approaches and different techniques. As she moved toward the extraction point, Maria wondered how many more impossible shots remained in her future. The answer would depend on how quickly enemies adapted to the reality that some things they considered impossible were simply waiting for the right person to prove them wrong. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, another impossible mission had been completed successfully, and another technological advantage had been preserved for her country. In a world where the margins between success and failure grew smaller every day, that would have to be enough.